All right. Have you ever wondered what it takes to turn real world experiences into compelling stories that captivate readers? Our guest today has done exactly that, more times than I can count on my fingers. From witnessing political upheavals across Latin America to collaborating with Navy SEALs and CIA operative, Ralph Pezzullo has transformed his unique global perspective into multiple best-selling books, award-winning plays, and powerful narratives that bridge cultural divides. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and creative content officer at Office on a Mission. And so whether you're a thought leader looking to share your expertise or an expert with stories that need to be told, today's episode will show you how to turn your experiences into powerful literature. Stay tuned as Ralph shares his journey from diplomat son to best-selling author and playwright. So, hi, welcome, Ralph.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Danielle. It's a pleasure to meet you and here to do this.
The funny thing is, I've hosted a couple podcasts already, and I love the conversations that I have with every one of them. But this is just so different for me because you have so many titles under your belt, from everything from playwriting to nonfiction to mystery. I mean, oh my goodness, what inspires you to go from one direction to the next?
Yeah, I've lived an interesting life. I've always been interested in characters and story, particularly people who are kind of tested, face impossible odds, and have to sort of figure out how to cope with it, how to deal with it. And I find people and psychology endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really easy to see why. I mean, your background is just fascinating. I mean, for anybody listening right now who might not know, you grew up across in multiple different countries during times of huge political change. I mean, how do these early experiences shape your perspective of who you are now and who you are as a writer? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about how, you have a deep, desire to know more about people. I guess it must be because of all this. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I was blessed. My father he grew up as son of a butcher from the Bronx. He joined the Foreign Service, which is the diplomatic service of the United States, when I was 5 years old. He was then assigned to sort of one hardship post after another, including Vietnam during the war, Bolivia, Guatemala, Nicaragua, where he served as ambassador, Uruguay, Haiti. So I was the oldest son, and I was always interested in what my father did. And he would pretty much every night when he came home from work, discuss it with me, what he was going through at the embassy, what the local issues were. We didn't always agree. He was interested. I was like a sounding board for him. So it was like an amazing education because I got to know sort of all the different characters at the different embassies, how they approached issues, and my father disagreed, or so on and so forth. And then as I got older, I was in Nicaragua when my father was named ambassador to the Sandinistas in 1979. Wow. And I was about the same age as them. I used to go fishing with them.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so...
When you go at fishing, you catch anything memorable?
Yeah, we actually... it's funny because whenever I went, my father was like the worst fisherman ever. Like whenever you went fishing with him, you never caught a fish. And when I went out with the Sandinistas one time, they took me out on a boat on Lake Nicaragua, and we caught so many fish. It was...
Oh, so you showed him up a little bit.
It was.
It's so funny.
I wasn't the only one. He just had to smell them or something, and they ran the other way.
Wow. But, I love how he was able to inspire you so much, just coming home and telling you those stories. But then also you have this dynamic, even the stories about the fishing. Some things you were like, I got some fish, and he comes home with these powerful stories. It's you're almost teaching each other a little bit while he's shaping.
Yeah. We were quite different people, and he was always very much caught up in the politics of the embassy, and I would be out, kind of whatever society we were living in. Like when I was 12 years old, we went to Vietnam, and it was in 1963, just before the war. We had 7,000 U.S. advisors there. It was very dangerous, a lot of terrorist activities against Americans, and our school was very short. We could only go for 3 hours to school. And so I found out that the embassy had shops where they had workmen who repaired all the houses that the embassy owned. It was like 40, 50 houses. And I don't remember exactly how I did this, but I sort of wrangled a job at the shop. And they would pick me up every day from school, and I would go around with them and, fix houses and paint and redo kitchens and so on and so forth, all kind of things that I like to do. But I worked with Vietnamese. They were all Vietnamese workers. And so I was on their soccer team. I went to their weddings. I was often the man of honor at their wedding. And they were my friends for like 3 years. So I really got to know kind of what local people were thinking about the American involvement in the war. I was also, another crazy coincidence, I was the bat boy for the U.S. Special Forces softball team.
The bat boy. Oh, the bat boy.
The bat boy. So I was not then, later. But, so I was like their mascot, right? And they would play softball, and after the game, we'd hang out and grill hamburgers and so on. And I would ask them about the war, and they would tell me, and they were special forces. So they were fighting, in the midst of all the action, working with the Montagnards, sort of the local tribesmen in central Vietnam. And they would tell me back in 1963, like, this is impossible. We'll never win this war. The Vietnamese people don't know what communism is. They don't know what democracy is. They don't know who the president is. They basically are rice farmers. They've been doing this for 200 years, and they want to be left alone. And I would tell this to my father, and he would go, oh, those guys don't know what they're talking about. And I would be like, Dad, they're out there fighting in the jungle, and we're here in our nice house in Saigon. How can they not know what's going on? And, so we used to have these arguments, different perspectives. And that definitely was an amazing education in many ways, and also familiarized myself with how government works, how it works overseas, how the State Department works, military, CIA, because I would mix with all these people.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say that there's so many levels to your childhood and your upbringing. I mean, let alone the fact that you lived in many different countries, but not only that, but like the different perspectives as well. You didn't just live in Vietnam, you lived in Vietnam, but also was hearing feedback from your father in addition to these very close friends that you were making. So it's almost like you're getting input from all different directions. And I mean, that's something remarkable because, as we know, a lot of children growing up like here nowadays, you stay in the same hometown, you're hearing the same things from the same people, your perspective is blocked off. And that's something that,
I had when I basically grew up overseas, and so when I went to college, I always considered myself an American. You're kind of like as an American student. My schools were always international schools, so you're always sort of like a unofficial spokesperson for the United States. So people like I graduated from high school in Colombia, Bogota, Colombia. And so people would come up to me and ask me, what's going on, the race riots or with this or with that. And, I'd have to explain it to them. And so,
so you're almost like their teacher in a way.
Yeah. Well, they're just curious. Like, I heard about this, and I heard about, Martin Luther King or Robert Kennedy was shot. What do you think and what's going on? And you do the best you can to try to explain, right? And then when I came back to the States, I was really excited. It was really the first time when I came to college, first time I had spent like a long period of time, or really lived in the United States since I was a kid. And when I went to college, I was like a foreigner. I had like a huge culture gap because they couldn't relate to me, and it was hard for me to relate to them because so many of their references of my fellow students were television. And I didn't know what they were talking about.
Just that in itself is a huge gap.
So they would say like, hey, Star Trek, man, blah, blah, blah. I'd be like, what's Star Trek? What? You don't know what Star Trek is? And then I'd watch it and I'd go, why would you spend an hour sitting watching a TV show when you could be out dancing or talking to your friends? Because in Latin America, it's very social, and so you're always going dancing, always going out, you're talking, you're hanging out, and it was different here. So there were so many things I had to adjust to.
Yeah, I mean, even that has so many layers to it. My first thought, which, you mentioned before, when you were overseas, you acted as almost like an ambassador, like filling everybody in of what was going on in the United States. Did anybody, when you came back here, ask you about what was going on over there? Or were they just like so involved in like TV that they were just like,
No, they were. I went to a good school, but they were pretty much oblivious. So
right. I mean, that's
my
how
parents
I
were
would
living
assume.
yeah, I came from Guatemala. My dad was in Guatemala when I went to college, and people would ask me, well, how do people live there? Do you live in a grass
Oh
hut?
my goodness.
And I go,
I had the
no.
same experience, actually.
Yeah.
This past summer, I was traveling. We were in Dubai, and we met this very lovely couple from Ireland. And the funny thing is they were so educated and knew exactly what was going on in the United States. They would talk about like gun violence and the elections. And here I am, like I'm pretty, up to date with things, but they knew things that like I wouldn't have even like assumed some of my own friends here in the United States would know. And it's just crazy to think how the different, cultures approach that sort of thing.
Yes.
So
And the other thing is that everyone, wherever you go in the world, they're all watching the United States because we're sort of the unofficial world leader, whether we see it that way or not. And they're fascinated and follow all the different cultural trends here and political things, more so than a lot of Americans. I mean, a lot of Americans are, like woefully misinformed.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate. I mean, I don't know what to blame exactly, our school system or our media.
Yeah, I think part of it is our school system and part of it is just the geography.
I mean, it's coming from me as a teacher too, but I definitely get it. Our curriculums are focused on American things, you don't have world history until high school.
Right.
Really. So when you think about it like that, in a way, I'm thinking now, all of your books, a lot of them are about events that have happened all over the world. So in a way, you're helping to bridge that gap by anybody who picks up your book, kind of giving them that perspective, whether they've thought to think about that way or not. You're opening their minds a little bit. That's a huge impact.
I'm trying. Yeah. I think a lot of people don't get a lot of context. So they hear about a problem in another country or a crisis like Ukraine or something like that. And they hear like a point of view, a perspective. They're being told that, but they're not. The news media does a really bad job of giving them perspective, like historical perspective. What is the relationship between Ukraine and Russia? What is their history?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're only hearing like what happened that day, and you're picking sides.
And people are confused. You're picking sides, right? Yeah, exactly.
Based on the little amount that
you're being sort of propagandized into taking a side, right? Instead of appreciating the whole context and going, well, it's complicated because they've had this complicated relationship with Russia, and then we were pushing Ukraine into NATO, and we had promised the Russians that we were going to abolish NATO after the fall of the Soviet Union. The purpose of NATO was to defend Europe from the Soviet Union. Well, once the Soviet threat was gone, Russia was like, well, you don't need NATO anymore, do you? And, so you get into all this stuff and complicates it, of course, but it also makes it more understandable. And you can make a more informed decision because you understand the history. It's like anything else. If you walk into a family and you just start making judgments about their dynamic and the roles different people play in the family, you're probably going to get it all wrong, right?
Yeah, you don't know the history. You don't know what happened before you walked in that door. It's just really admirable that you were able to experience that, but you didn't just keep it to yourself. You've been able to take it and influence other people and try to teach them and give them a backstory in very engaging ways. I mean, when I was looking at some of your books, the covers and the descriptions itself, I was like, this is actually like really cool stuff. I mean, a lot of it's very serious, but it's also like something people want to hear about. And you made it very well written in a way that someone want to keep turning those pages.
I was lucky, I was fortunate, my circumstances. And then I felt like, I wanted to share, my experiences, the unique. And, and I learned also, from moving from country to country that people live differently in different places. They believe, they have different beliefs, and it's okay. It works for them. Not everybody is like us or thinks like us.
So I mean, it's very clear that your perspective was shaped by only the people that were around you, but your father's influence too. He would come home and tell you stories from one side, you hear it from another. And I guess that's sort of what drove you to have that passion for, told me in the beginning of this, like characters and different stories. And so one of my questions I was going to ask you is sort of how you went from that nonfiction realm to, the exciting, more fictional stories. But now I think I have a good idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is it because you have that passion for coming up with stories and characters?
I don't find it hard to shift from one to the other. To me, it's all storytelling, and it's making, having believable characters with their unique perspective and voice, and then putting them in interesting circumstances. This is rife with conflict that really challenge them. And it works interestingly both for drama and comedy, because all good comedy also comes out of conflict, which a lot of people don't realize. Think of like The Odd Couple. You have two guys who are friends, but they're completely different people, and they have a whole different approach to housekeeping and living. And it's funny because they're constantly arguing.
Right, opposites clash. Yeah, no, and it's funny that you say that, because I can see how, by coming up with characters that clash like that, it's just pretty much mimicking what you grew up with, because you had just so many different sides and perspectives from people, and you took that and you put it into the paper and made it in a way that's so engaging that people want to read it and watch it. I mean, it's funny to think that you went from that to the books, but also to the stage too. It's just like a whole nother realm.
Well, I started as a journalist, and I got into playwriting of all things. I wasn't really a theater type of person, but just the genre of telling stories on stage really fascinated me. And from that, I got into books, and I've written political speeches and done advertising. I've written kind of, at this point, everything, right? It's all
it is all communication, getting your idea across, a message in an entertaining way, whether it be comedy, nonfiction, drama. Has one of them resonated with you more than the others, or has one just sort of, if you had to choose one?
I actually love playwriting. If I had,
the way you spoke of it made me think that too.
because it's very exciting. You're dealing with live actors and a live audience. It's a very creative process. The only problem with it is it's very hard to make a living.
I guess that's sort of one reason why you might have branched into other areas.
I had to. Because once I started, for a while, I lived in New York, and I used to do, I don't know, I've had maybe over a dozen plays produced in London and New York, and it was a lot of fun. But then I started having a family, and it was like, this isn't going to work, because you're basically living off of fellowships and things like that.
Yeah, whatever you can come across, I guess.
Right. It's really hard to have a commercial success in the theater. I had successes, but you still don't make any money. It's super exciting because you're reacting to a real audience, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's a matter of, I guess, passion versus what's feasible. But I'm glad that you were able to sort of balance that and branch off of it. It's something that I have a lot of people mention to me actually as a ghostwriter, because everybody wants to get their story told and make a book and publish it. But there's a certain way to do it so that it actually becomes a success that you can have revenue off of. Just like you were saying, it's very difficult to be successful in the playwriting world. Same thing with business books, nonfiction books, anything. It has to be organized in, such a way. It's almost like a separate skill set of itself.
Well, there's being a creative person, which is a writer is a creative person. And then there's the whole business side of it, which is a whole different thing. So you have to learn to balance. It's just, if you're going to survive doing this, you have to figure that out.
Yeah, it does, especially if you're trying to figure it out on yourself. Has there been anybody in particular who helped you along with this journey? For example, Office on Mission helps different clients and tells them, what the next step should be, and, editing, marketing. Now, for example, I know you've had a lot of projects with Don Mann, for example. Has he helped you out on this journey?
Not really. I mean, Don's a great guy. He approached me. He was...
I was curious about how that happened.
Yeah. Well, actually, he approached a friend of mine who was a writer, famous television writer, who used to be the showrunner for Murder, She Wrote. And Don had approached him, and he said, you're talking to the wrong guy. You have to talk to Ralph Pezzullo. So I got a call from this Don Mann, who's an incredible man.
Right. I'm sure you knew his name even before when he put the phone, right?
No, and he basically said, I've done all these missions and for 20 years or whatever. And I can't tell these stories as nonfiction because a lot of the times I was doing missions for the CIA and they were classified, but I can write them as
I didn't think
fiction.
about it like
Yeah.
that.
And
I
he
just
said,
thought
would
you
you
were.
be interested? So what happened was he basically, we talked a lot and he told me about, I got to know him. I started with the characters. So in SEAL teams, that they work in teams and, it's usually like 6 to 8 guys. So I started to formulate the team based on people that Don knew. And then in the middle of it, the Bin Laden mission took place and the Navy SEALs were involved in it. And so I had sent out a proposal for the first nonfiction book. And suddenly all these publishers were calling me and saying, hey, was Don involved in the mission against Bin Laden? And he hadn't been involved directly, but he had trained the guys who went into Islamabad. And so I told them that, and they were all like, well, would you write a book with him about SEAL Team 6? And I said, sure. And originally we were going to write about the mission itself, and the military was giving us permission to do it because I had written other books that they felt were very fair to the CIA and the government and so on. And then halfway through, they said no. There's been too much information that's come out about the mission, and we don't want to do that. So I had already made a deal with the publisher, so I went back to them and said, what about if I just wrote about Don's experience in the SEALs and his career and kind of what it's like to be a member of SEAL Team 6? And we wrote a book that became a New York Times bestseller called Inside SEAL Team 6. And the same publisher picked up the fiction series, the thriller series as well. And I think I wrote eight books in that series. So I got tired of it.
Oh, you said you're tired of it now. If someone approached for another one.
When you do a series like that, they want one book a year. And so it's a lot. And after a while, I was kind of like, I had other things that I was interested in doing. And it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
I mean, I'm sure. One thing that really stuck out to me when you were talking is that you mentioned at first the government was on board because of your previous works, because of how you were able to speak about everything in a fair perspective. I mean, that's something that I would like to know more about. Maybe our listeners do too, as aspiring writers, because when you talk about sensitive topics like that, how do you portray it in a way that's fair to both sides and not leaning one to the other? It's hard to take a step back in your writing. I'm working with somebody right now. I'm editing his book, and he was part of the military as well. And a lot of his stuff is just very one-sided. And I'm trying to help him. Okay, let's say it this way, so that we want your ideas heard, but we also want to get to the facts as well. I mean, tell me a little about that. What did you do in order to make it so balanced?
Well, so a part of it, I've written a lot of books, probably 8 or 9 or 10, with other people. So they were for example, I think it was 2005, I was approached by a former CIA operations officer who had gone into Afghanistan after 9/11 and defeated the Taliban and had Bin Laden trapped in Tora Bora. And so he approached me. He had read one of my books and he contacted me and said, hey, I want you to write my story. So, the first thing you have to do is gain that person's trust, right? So they're going to tell you a lot of things that you have to, probe them. Because a lot of people will just say, well, yeah, I was there and I did this and so on. And then you got to go, okay, wait a minute. Now you were there. You were in the room. Who was in the room with you? What was on the floor? What was on the walls? What were they wearing? All that stuff to get all that color. And also you have to gain their trust. So if they tell you, hey, I don't want to write about this or I can't write about this, you have to go, okay, fine, I won't. And so then after a while, do a couple books like that, and you're recommended to other people, and they read your books, and they go, they understand that it's a fair portrayal, that you have an understanding of what's like to be working for the government or in the military, because you're not completely a free agent. If you're in the CIA or the military, you're going to be asked to do things that as a civilian you might not do, right? And
they don't want to share that necessarily, or maybe it's traumatizing.
You just have to respect that, right? So you go, okay, I get it. My dad worked for the military, for the government, and he sometimes disagreed with their policies, but he had to carry them out. So it's and a lot of people who look at that kind of thing from the outside go, well, I would never do that. If they told me to do that, I would never do that. Well, that's easy to say, but if that's your career and that's how you make your living and you've got a family, you're not so rash in terms of how you make decisions. So anyway, with that, you have to bring that understanding to it, and then they appreciate it. Okay, you can relate to my experience. You get it. You're not judging me. And I think we're often very quick to judge other people based on what they do. And the point is to kind of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing with my clients as well. As a ghostwriter, you need to have that level of trust in order for them to really get their thoughts out there. It's the only way to effectively convey what they're trying to say on the paper, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's this one client I work with. It's funny, he jokes that I'm like his therapist because we'll talk on video calls just like this, right? And he does that. Yeah. He'll cross his arms and he'll look up at the ceiling and he'll close his eyes. He'll just start like talking to me, and it's like, I'm here typing away.
Right.
It's really funny.
Yeah, I get that often. This is like
that,
therapy. Yeah, because you're taking people through difficult situations, like asking them to relive them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I've written books with people, and they'll tell me something, and they'll go, I don't want to talk about that. And I'll go, well, this is an important story. You should share this with people, and so on and so forth. And then they will, and they'll say, oh, that was really helpful, like to get that out. And
I'm sure that's a level of bravery on your end, because my instinct would be like, okay, don't worry about it. Like, you have to take, a step and kind of hold their hand a little, be like, it's okay,
That's
talk about it. It'll make you feel better as well, and it'll help other people by hearing your story.
The way I do it is I just say, you want to make this as real and interesting as possible. So it's always the difficult things, the times when you're challenged the most, that have the most sizzle to them, right? It's like, I want to hear when you're scared to death, like if you're a Navy SEAL, when you're like, oh my God, like this is the end of my life. What do you do? Do you pray? What do you do? And they don't like to talk about that, but they will. And then when that's communicated, it makes the person more human, because you go like, yeah, well, God, yeah, if I were there, I mean, one thing you learn, for example, like I've met a lot of SEALs and Delta Force and so on. They're all physically like unbelievably fit beyond most athletes. Like they're amazing, but always they'll tell you like the mental part is the most important. And also your psyche is very fragile. So even if you're the toughest guy in the world, if you see something horrible, like a family get their house blown up or whatever, it affects you.
Even if you don't want to think about it, it's still going to be there in your mind. The more you talk about it, the more you get that story out, that's only going to help you.
And that's why there's so much PTSD and so on, despite the physical training. You see your friend blown up in front of you. That just shatters you mentally. A lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, you're one of the people who do, because you were so close to it, and I'm sure you have your own experiences that are very similar too. I have this one client, he's a firefighter, and he, not exactly the same, but very similar, where he sees these tragic things happen, and unfortunately, in a world where these Navy SEALs, like you said, they're big, buff guys, you don't think that they would initially have these things they're dealing with inside.
Of course.
Yeah, and so your books help to humanize that in a way.
That's just being honest and truthful about how people, what people are like. They can be tough physically, but mentally, all of us are fragile.
Yeah.
And when we face certain things that are hard to fit into our view of the world, it rattles us.
Yeah, and even the way you're talking to me right now, and listeners, I'm sure you can hear this too. His tone just went down. He's very deeply affected by it. So I can tell by if this is how you talk to me about it, when you talk to your clients and the people you're telling their story, also you relate to them and you're able to gain their trust in that way. And I can see how that really builds those connections for you. You mentioned a couple times how that different people reach out to you to tell their story.
Yeah, mostly now. Yeah. The way it works is people reach out to me. So, and I go, okay, sounds good. And you have to be very honest with them. Sometimes, a lot of times people reach out and they have like a particular story that's great, but they don't have enough for a book, like their life, they haven't done enough. And I'll tell them, or they'll tell me about something and it's really interesting to me. And I'll say, look, I'll write the book. I want to do this, but it might be hard to get it. It might be a difficult process getting it published because you get a sense of kind of what the marketplace is like. And so that's a whole other aspect of this, right? But I try to be as honest with them up front. Like, here's the deal. This is what I'll try to do. But if it doesn't work, we're going to have to go to a smaller publisher. There'll be a smaller advance. And also, I have no control over how it does.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you can do your best.
Sometimes they're bestsellers and sometimes they're not. And there's so many different contingencies and things that are out of our control.
Yeah, I mean, I might offer a counter argument. I mean, I work with Authors on Mission, and we do our best to sort of frame the book from the beginning in a way that, would resonate. And, I do agree that there's only so much you can do with an idea sometimes. But, for example, if you're a business person and you have this, great framework that works for your business, you could write about it and, just put the facts right down on paper. But, if you go about it in a way that's going to, be a bestseller by having, it's structured in a way that it's easy to follow and easy to implement, and you could share your ideas with people. If you do it in a certain way, it does have a higher success rate, a higher probability. Absolutely. So sometimes it's a matter of just working with a team that can, take it and build it up a little bit. It's all about teamwork.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's collaboration. It's working with other people. It's getting the best out of other people and working together. Yeah,
definitely. And that's what you were mentioning before. And, that's what you have to do when you have so many different projects like you do going on. It's sometimes someone just take your hand and guide you. And
some people are afraid. They're they get into it and then they're like, I've worked with several people who were, either CIA or FBI, who were not public people, who were undercover officers, and they've never been, they're prominent in their field, but they've never been in the public before. And so suddenly when CNN wants to interview them, they get disheartened. Yeah, I've had an author call me from the studio at CNN going, Ralph, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure. What did you say to somebody when they ask you that? Like, how do you hype them up and give them that confidence?
Yeah, I just say, look, you can do it. This is kind of what you wanted. This is part of the process. But if you don't, it's okay. Like, it'll affect sales and so on and so forth, but we'll figure it out. So not to put more pressure on them, but to just say, hey, if you don't feel good about this, don't do it. There'll be there'll be other interviews and so on.
From what I'm noticing from your conversation, it actually sounds like it's very challenging to work with other people in a way too, because you have to have them open up to you. You have to form that trust, but also, once the book's published, like in this scenario that you're talking about, it's a matter of, getting them to take the next step. They have the book, their name's on it, it's on the shelf, but then you have to take the next step and keep going with it, build that credibility, that publicity, everything. So it's hard, and it requires an amount of strength and bravery. So I guess, again, that's where the support team comes into play, helping them and guiding and giving advice and supporting. It's all part.
I've had situations where I wrote a book with a guy who was a detective, and then at the last minute he started getting cold feet and he didn't want to publicize it. And the publisher was like, what the hell's going on? Like, we invested a lot of money in this book. We totally believe in it. Ralph, you've done an amazing job. And I'm like, hey, we're going to have to figure out how to work around him because he's got cold feet.
So you stuck by him. You defended him in that case.
Well, I mean, what do you?
I like that too. You have to think about the situation. You can't always force things.
It was disappointing. Sales were disappointing when it came out, but over time, it's performed really well. It's been, made all its money back and more, and it's been optioned for movies and TV and so on. And
that's incredible.
The thing that's interesting about books is that, once they're written, they're around. People can discover them later. Sometimes it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes it does.
I love that you said that. I think the thing about books is that they're always around. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one way to preserve your legacy. I mean, you hear it all
Right.
the time. Whatever ideas you have, your experiences, your business frameworks, your childhood, whatever it is that you're writing about, it's always going to be on that page. And nowadays with these computers, you could just search it right up and anybody could find it and hear and learn from your story. And that's what's incredible about, people who actually take the step to write the books.
Yeah, I had an experience during COVID. I wrote a book about my growing up in Vietnam, and it was very difficult to publicize it at that time. And it came out, I got great reviews and so on and so forth. And then like a year later, I got a call from a gentleman in New York, a Vietnamese gentleman. He says, I represent the Vietnamese government in New York, and I love your book, and I want to publish it in Vietnam, in Vietnamese. Wow. And I was like, okay, how do can you help? I don't know how to do that. And he goes, I can help you. I know, I'm connected to the government. And it came out in Vietnam, and it's like a big hit in Vietnam. So, you just never know.
Now, that you said you wrote it over COVID. That can't be your first book that you're referring to. That one was in like the 90s. This is another book.
No. I've written, it was
a couple
of books
that in the same type.
It was kind of a book that I knew. I had actually tried to publish it through major publishers, and they all loved it. But they were like, Ralph, I don't know, we can't, we don't, it's hard to justify investing money in this book because it's a memoir and Vietnam. And I'm like, okay. So during COVID, when I had some time, I figured, hey, I'm going to write it myself.
Give it a try.
Just write it and figure out a way to get it published. And I did with a smaller publisher. It got really great reviews, but it was hard to get it, attention from the press. And then, it ended up, the attention I got came from Vietnam, of all places.
Right. And, one thing you just mentioned that like stood out in my mind is that, you decided to just do it on your own.
Right.
And that's something I hear from a lot of clients I work with, because people have like this like perfect time mentality where it's like, I'm too busy, or like, I can't do it. The publisher rejected me. But it's funny, I actually was just talking to somebody who COVID for them was their time to write also. It kind of was like a catalyst for inspiration for a lot of people, I guess. But it's a matter of actually just going out there and doing it. I tell that all the time to my people I work with. You have to set a time, you have to hold yourself accountable, you have to get up in the morning and get in front of that computer and just let your ideas flow. And that's what you did. Many times.
Yeah. No. It's a discipline for sure. It can be done.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the funny thing is we've been talking this whole time, and I feel like I actually haven't even touched upon a lot of my questions. I feel like I've just been riffing off of everything you're saying here. I'm going to take a look and see what else we definitely want to cover here. For example, I know you're having another book published coming out very soon, December 10th, right?
Yeah, so let me tell you the story behind that. About this summer, I was approached by, I won't tell you, it's a long story. But anyway, I was approached by two government whistleblowers. Now, whistleblowers are people who have had, who have worked in the government, are probably retired, and they get registered as like official whistleblowers for the Justice Department. Go ahead.
I actually worked with a couple of whistleblowers myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but please continue, because our listeners might not. So please continue and let everybody know. Yeah.
So they register with the Justice Department, and basically what they do is they bring criminal cases to the Justice Department. And if money is recovered during that criminal proceeding, they get somewhere between a third to 15% of what is recovered. So these two gentlemen were very high level. One is a former CIA officer who was like the most decorated CIA operations officer in history. Incredible human being. And they basically came to me and said they had been investigating what is not very well known, but is the most powerful criminal cartel in the world. And it's run out of Venezuela. And they control all the drug trafficking out of Latin America and into United States, Europe, and the Middle East. And it's called the Cartel del Sol. And basically, after Hugo Chavez was elected president in Venezuela, he turned the army into this sort of criminal enterprise. And Cali cartel and the Medellin, all these different cartels really run for the Cartel del Sol. And they were making cases against the Cartel del Sol, recovering assets and so on and so forth. And in the process of that, a lot of the witnesses that they recruited started talking about the system of election fraud. And they were like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, the Venezuelan government under Hugo Chavez set up of using electronic voting machines to steal elections. So anyway, they started investigating it, and they came to me. They had been investigating it for 4 years, and they came to me and they said, and they showed me the results of their investigation, which was like a 5-hour presentation. And they said, we want you to write a book about this. And I said,
That's
okay,
huge. Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
They came to you.
Yeah, they came to me, and I was like, okay. I knew it was going to be controversial and difficult, and they wanted it written very quickly. So the book was supposed to come out before the election, but the publisher got cold feet and wanted to publish it after the election. He didn't want to be accused of election interference. What they found was that this system, there was software that was developed in Venezuela in 2003 that was designed to manipulate the results of elections. It's migrated from Venezuela into Latin America, into the United States, and into 72 countries around the world. And what they had done is they had recruited the engineers, the Venezuelan computer engineers, who had actually written the software and the source code, which is sort of the DNA of the software. And these guys could tell you exactly how, for example, the Democratic primary in Cook County, Chicago in 2006 was stolen for Obama, that Hillary Clinton really won, because they had done it, and they could tell you exactly how they did it. And this held true for, they've basically manipulated the results of every election since 2008 in the United States. And some people along the way, some officials along the way had sort of gotten wind of this, that these companies that they bought in the United States, they did it in a way that looked like they were owned by Americans, but they were really owned by Venezuela. And the source code throughout all of it was the same, and they could track it. Now they own election companies all over the world, and it's a huge business for them. And so this exposes that. It explains how they put it together, who the people are, how they hid all the kind of corporate machinations, and how the system is built with sort of 15 or 16 different backdoors into it that they can use to change results, and also hide the fact that they have changed the result. And they also own a lot of the audit companies. So it's a system run out of Venezuela, Cuban help, a lot of money from China, money from Russia, Serbia and Iran are also involved. Anyway.
Would you say that a lot of people know about this, or is this the first time that it's been?
No, people don't.
I would have never. My goodness.
You know what happened was, and after the 2020 election, when Trump said, "I feel like something," our polls, the numbers don't conform to our poll result, and he started saying there was election fraud. Well, he was right, and these two guys, these two whistleblowers, had gone to Trump and showed him the evidence. But he had told Sidney Powell and Rudolph Giuliani, who were Trump's attorneys, don't reveal it now, because we have to do a criminal investigation. So we have to back up all these things that we're alleged. We have to recruit sources. We have to, how the source code has been changed and modified and so on and so forth. Well, they went out and announced it. Do you remember when Sidney Powell came out and said, I have the Kraken, I'm going to release the Kraken? That's what she was talking. She was talking about this.
What you said, but wow.
Yeah. She was talking about this, and they broke with her because they were like, you shouldn't be saying that. We don't have the evidence yet. It's taken them 4 years to collect all the evidence, and now
so I'm shocked that now you're able to finally, you must have been holding all this in, that you were working on such an important project. Ralph, this is huge. When this comes out, this is not going to change lives. This is going to change
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And what happened was, even our publisher, when I first was approached by the whistleblowers, I said, I only know one publisher who will publish this book, because he's very brave, and a lot of them are going to be worried and they're going to get sued and so on and so forth. And so I called him up and I told him about it, and he went, "Oh yeah, let's do it. It's amazing." But then as it got closer to publication, he got cold feet. His lawyer stepped
lots
in
of cold feet in your life.
yeah, and said,
Everyone's always backing down.
You're going to get sued. You're going to get, they're going to come after you and all that stuff. So myself and one of the whistleblowers, we decided to go public. Before, Joe Rogan wouldn't touch it, Tucker Carlson wouldn't touch it, nobody would touch it. And we decided to do our own videos and so on and put it out, and we did. And we got, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 20 million hits, and nobody sued us, because these companies are not going to sue us. We knew that, because we have the truth, we have the evidence, and we have the witnesses. But nobody else, like Tucker Carlson, they were afraid. They're like, well, we're going to get sued, we're going to lose our companies, all this stuff. So now we're in the process of getting the book out, and we're going to start publicizing the story, and it's going to spread
it's
big
going to be
implications all over the world. Yeah.
Ralph, I think you're the only person who could have written this book. I mean, anybody else, like you said, just the layer of being afraid, right? Yeah. Backing out from it. From everything you've just said, I don't think you haven't really turned away a project unless, like you said, if it wasn't going to be read, but
right.
You're not afraid. You're brave to just put your hands in that, and something that I would be afraid to touch it, but that's something that is so important, especially in the state of our nation right now. And just all of your experiences, the way you're able to see different sides, different cultures, just from your childhood to now. I mean,
well, that's kind of how I felt. It was like, if I don't do this, nobody else can do it. And they knew about me. They had read my books and so on. So they were like, you're the guy who we've asked around. Like, you're the guy who has to do it. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I mean, I saw they had a presentation that was 5 hours long with all the evidence. I mean, it was shocking, horrifying.
Those 5 hours went by like a...
Yeah, and I was like, okay, what do you want me to do? And they're like, we want you to write a book. I'm like, okay. I knew it was going to be, controversial and difficult. And the FBI were going after us at one point, saying we're going to arrest you for election interference.
How did you feel? Were you ever scared? I would be nervous, no?
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking, but at the same time, it's like, my feeling is you got to trust the truth. If we don't rely on the truth, then what are we doing here? The truth.
That's all coming out in just a couple weeks, because I am imagining just a cascade of just doors flooding open once this comes out.
Oh, it's funny. I think it will happen over time, but initially there's a lot of it's hard for people to believe.
Despite the evidence, despite all the research, the 5-hour presentation.
I've told a lot of people who know me, and I explain it to them, and they're like, "Venezuela? Are you kidding?" I'm like, Venezuela is one of the richest countries in the world. They have the highest oil reserves in the world. They make $1 trillion a year from oil, and another $1 trillion a year from running the Cartel del Sol. They've bought off like so many people. And then the Chinese are involved too. And they've got, endless amounts of money. So this is like a global conspiracy to undermine democracy. They really they want to undermine our system of government. And George Soros and his foundations, and there are a lot of different aspects to this. It's alarming and it's shocking, but it's all true. Look at the evidence. The evidence is, at this point has been reviewed by, district attorneys and people in Congress, and even President-elect Trump, Elon Musk, and they all go, okay, they have the evidence. It's
been validated by multiple sources that are very close to this, and still what you're saying is you don't think it's going to make a wave. And that goes back to the beginning of this conversation, where when you came back to America, weren't even interested in hearing, your stories of what's going on the other side of the world. It reflects in our population. Maybe we're just so close-minded to not see the facts that are right in front of us.
Sometimes, yeah, it's cognitive dissonance term. So people just can't wrap their heads around it initially, and they go, well, wait a minute, how could this go on without our CIA or our FBI knowing about it? And it's like, well, it did.
Is there anything you can share with us right now that maybe is allowed to be shared at this point for publication? Sure. Not like a point of evidence that maybe our readers would want to hear about, our listeners want to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that now this is all according to the engineers who created this system and have been monitoring it all the way through. But they claim that Obama did not win in 2008. He wasn't elected president. He wasn't elected the second time in 2012. That in 2016, Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump, which she alleged at the time, and everybody was shocked. Well, they had manipulated the results because they thought Venezuela and China had this thought that Trump would be a disaster as president and somebody who they could easily manipulate. Well, what happened was Trump was elected, and right away he went after the regime in Venezuela, and he indicted a bunch of them. So they went, okay, well, next time when he runs for re-election, we're going to get rid of this guy, which they did. So Biden did not win in 2020. There was massive election fraud, and they tried to skewer the results in the recent election. They were trying to get Kamala Harris to win, but Trump had so much support that they overwhelmed like the extent to which they could steal votes.
I feel like I need a minute to process. It's just like, so much.
No, it's crazy.
Crazy. Wow. I mean, it's just funny because all the time on the news, every time on social media, you're hearing so many different sides to this stuff. But then it's like, okay, the facts are right here in front of us. It's going to be in a book that you're publishing.
Right. And the thing is that what I explain to everybody is like, look, it's not about politics. It's not about, the Republicans or the Democrats. It's the fact that foreigners, a conspiracy of foreign powers, are determining the results of our election. They're trying to undermine our country. And they're not just doing it here. They're doing it in 72 countries around the world. So
Ralph, are you allowed to talk about this right now?
Yeah. So I've done interviews in India and Australia and so on. And it's the same. Everybody's just like, oh my God. Well, it makes sense. And I'm like, yeah, look, I had the same reaction. I understand. When I first heard it all, it made me sick. I was just like, oh my God.
You don't want to believe it. I can see why you think that
you don't want to believe it. You want to think that our country, things are safe. But then when they break it down and you see how people in different states saw this and reported it, but nobody really followed through. And our whole system of how we run our elections is very not so well organized, and that electronic voting machines, one thing that I've learned from these engineers is that there's no such thing as a safe electronic voting. They can always be manipulated. So what's the answer? Going back to paper ballots, where people show ID. And
even how many people are actually going to go out and when they have to do it like that, right? Like wait in a line, show an ID. I get it.
That's what we have. Like, for example, I'll tell you one thing that they do. So like when illegal immigrants come into the country, they are told to register to vote. So they call in, let's say you're in, Nevada or California, you register to vote. Your name is in the register, right? Without you ever appearing, you just call up and you say, hey, I want to register to vote. My name is Jose Lopez or whatever it is. Then they give you a mail-in ballot. Sometimes they fill it out for you. It's filled out for Jose Lopez voting for these candidates. He sends it in. They get the officials receive the ballot. They look and they see that Jose Lopez is registered to vote. They count the ballot. Jose Lopez has never appeared at a voting station. He's never had to approve.
He just did.
Yeah, but the laws are very lax in certain states, and so they know all this and they know how to manipulate our system. They've studied it so carefully, and we're sitting here going, how come there are like 100, like in 2000, 100 percent of registered voters voted in certain states. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Have you seen that movie Swing Vote? Because it's what you're reminding me of.
Yeah, no, I haven't. No.
Yeah, it's this little girl. She like goes into the voting booth and votes on behalf of her dad, and then it becomes like, I think her one vote was what, like, in the fictional world made
Right.
her be elected. But I see what you mean, because like, how can we be sure of these things? And I'm sure that you've discussed in a lot of detail in your upcoming book about it, but like, is our system so insecure that anyone can just come in and manipulate like that? Like, it's
Unfortunately, the answer is yes. It has been. It's people have manipulated our system and continue to, and right under our noses. And they've done it since 2008. So at this point, they've perfected how they do that, and they're very clever. And they work through by different companies. They claim that they're U.S. companies or Canadian companies, but really the ownership goes back to Venezuela. But the owners are hidden because the companies are registered in Curacao, which is a Dutch island in the Caribbean. And in Curacao, you don't have to reveal the names of your corporate leader. They're really smart.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that you go into all this detail within it. Readers, listeners right now, you have to check out this book. I mean, I know I'm going to. Where can they find this when it comes to this? Going to be Amazon, bookstores?
It's called Stolen Elections, The Plot to Destroy Democracy. And it is, we're fighting now with the publisher to get it out. It's supposed to come out December 10th. We're trying to get it out sooner. And, but yeah.
It's coming up sooner than we think. That's only,
it's only a couple
weeks.
Yeah.
Wow. I'll be on that NIC. I'm going to be the first have the first copy.
Yeah, it's really really fascinating. Yeah. It's and it was just, for me, it was a lot of information to assimilate and put down in a way that was easy for people to comprehend, because it's a complicated story. And also the other thing I learned was that they work with the collaboration of certain people in our government. So certain people have been bought on.
And I'm guessing you probably say the names of these people too.
Some of them, yeah.
Some of them.
Some of them have. Some people have already been arrested.
Okay, so some of it's public already, and others, I guess,
but nobody's put it all together. So, like, these whistleblowers have gone to the FBI and CIA and so on and said, hey, this is a bad guy. Here's the information. Why? And he's arrested. Like, he was a former U.S. ambassador. He had high posts in the State Department, and he's arrested. But they don't explain why. They just say this individual was arrested and sentenced to so many years in jail for sedition or for activities against the U.S. government. But they don't explain that it's all tied in to this whole bigger thing, because it's like it's an ongoing investigation.
Well, I mean, again, I can't wait to learn more about this. You just blew my mind. I'm about to, I'm going to be on this call. I'm going to go find myself some more research to figure all this out. I got to look up myself now.
It's crazy.
Well, that's really powerful stuff. This whole conversation's been actually very powerful, deep, almost on the darker side of things, which I'm realizing now. I'm wondering, the funny thing is, when I do these podcasts, I always like to sort of end off with a little fun game. I don't know, do you think we're ready for something a little bit more lighthearted?
Sure. Let's do it.
So I do something called a rapid fire round, and I just kind of, shoot out some fun questions. More so about you as a person rather than your experiences necessarily. Are you game? You want to play?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's important, oh my gosh, I'm almost I need a minute before transitioning myself too, so I'm sure our listeners are ready. So, the first question I think for a rapid fire round is, you've been all around the world. What is your favorite international cuisine from everywhere you've been? Oh gosh,
I love Vietnamese food.
Yeah?
But yeah. It's very clean and healthy, and I love it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've actually traveled a lot myself, and I think I haven't been, had Vietnamese for myself, but I know over there, there's nothing packaged, processed.
No, nothing.
Freshly caught or cultivated.
Right. That's
I love that. Okay, let's keep, it's a fun rapid fire round. So what's the most dangerous situation you've been in while doing your research? Have you ever been sort of I guess aside from what we just talked about,
Yeah, I've done some crazy things. Like for one book, my co-author and I had to sue the CIA
Really?
because they weren't going to release the book. Yeah.
They were
And
preventing you. Wow.
they said,
Okay.
I mean, the CIA has guidelines. So when you're writing a book with this or CIA agent, which I did, I went to them and actually the head of the CIA at the time sent us wrote a memo giving us permission to write about the subject. So
That's
when I sold the book, the publishers would ask, "Well, how is the CIA going to release this book?" And we'd show them the memo, and they'd go, "Okay, great." Well, what happened was I was just finishing the book, and they changed the head of the CIA. They put in a new head, and the new head, one of the things he specifically said is, "I'm not going to let this book come out." So
okay.
suddenly
Yeah, that's
I
problematic.
had a big problem. I told my co-author, and basically the CIA has something called the Public Review Board, which reviews all publications review board. Any book having to do with the CIA or somebody who was in the CIA, they have to review it. So I sent it to them, and they went, everything's fine, but the White House is holding up your book. And I'm like, well, it's supposed to be published. I already accepted the advance. I finished the book. The publishers, which that book was Crown Random House, they're giving me a hard time. Like, when am I going to get the manuscript back? And this dragged out for months and months and months.
Really?
And finally, they said, your book's not going to get released.
So it's still not.
Yeah. I said, well, it was eventually.
Okay.
And I said, well, what do I do? They said, well, the only thing you can do is sue the CIA. Sue us. This is coming from the CIA. And I said, how do I do that? And they gave me the name of a lawyer. They said, call this guy. He sues us all the time. He knows exactly how to do it. So
It told you and gave you the resources to sue them. That's funny.
Yeah, so we sued the CIA, and we had to go to court, and it was this whole process, and we won. And the book came out, became a #1 bestseller.
And which one was that?
Called Jawbreaker.
Jawbreaker. Okay.
Yeah,
I saw that one. I didn't realize the whole story behind that.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. And so there were points where I was in danger too, because I was working from classified information. I wasn't supposed to see it under the rules of the second head of the CIA. The first guy had given me permission, but the second guy was basically like, no, the book's not going to come out, and you shouldn't even be in possession of some of this material. Like, you're in violation of the law, and the FBI is going to arrest you, so you better get rid of it. And
Did any of this scare you at this point?
Yeah,
You weren't scared?
yeah, because I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do?
Right.
I mean, everybody's seen the manuscript. I've seen.
It's already out there.
So how am I going to hide it? Anyway,
Wow.
My wife wasn't too happy with me that time, but it was okay.
Well, I'm sure after all of your success, she's got to know, like, you're
it
dealing
comes with the territory. Yeah,
yeah.
It comes with the territory.
It's so funny. I tried to bring us on to a little bit something lighthearted.
I'm sorry.
And somehow managed to get us back to that.
Okay.
But no, it's the thing, though.
Try
It's
again.
okay.
Try again.
No, but here's the thing. I think it's important because maybe that's a tendency for us here, like in America, to just try to be like, let's lighten it up by talking about your favorite food. So you can't do that. This is
people always ask me, like, how can you do this? How can you live this way? Aren't you worried? And it's like, you know what? It's just exciting. It's interesting. It's like, when you dig into anything, you're going to turn up stuff that's going to be controversial. And
it's hard stuff. It's serious. You can't go down by let her play it lighthearted. You have to do it right. You have to.
That's right. You do the best you can, but it's like it comes with the territory. I mean, if you're going to be a writer about crime or current events or political events or the intelligence community or any of those subjects, you're going to run into controversial material.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like honestly just a great way to start leaving our listeners right now. It's just the fact that even though we're here and, you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're like just laying on your couch or sitting in traffic, but there's a whole world out there that is being impacted by so many things that we don't even think about. Like we're thinking about the next episode of like The Golden Bachelor or something right now. Whereas like, but then you have
people say that none of that stuff interests me because the world is so much more interesting. Like if you engage in the world and what's going on in any area, in your town, in your city, whatever, it's going to be, you talk about corruption or crime, or you're going to find it all over the place. I mean, engage the world, engage the world around you. And,
yeah, open
you'll
your
find
window.
plenty to keep you occupied and entertained. Yeah.
Well, to everybody listening, I mean, I've learned a lot by talking to you for the last hour and a half now, almost. Wow. That's longer than what I usually do, but this is important stuff. It's just something that people need to hear about. So, if you're listening, please, mark your calendars. December 10th. Check out his new release. It's going to be so important, and I want to be on, the beginning side of this. Just say like I read his book before it actually made all this wave going to happen. So
yeah, it's going to take time probably, but it will be an important story.
Do you have anything else you'd like to leave our listeners off with today?
Not really. Just like I said, engage the world. It's very there's so much going on, and being involved it makes you feel alive. It's exciting, whatever it is. But there's a lot for us to kind of dig into and get engaged in.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that, your journey as a person in life and in your authorship, it shows how powerful storytelling can bridge cultures, it can share hidden truths, it can create lasting impact. So to any of our listeners out there who are considering writing their own book, don't be afraid. Don't, push it off to that perfect moment like we talked about here. Get out there, write it. If you need support, reach out. Authors on Mission is perfect for that. We have teams of people who can help you. I do it all the time. I take ideas, I put it into an outline for people, even if it's meshed up topics everywhere, and we help you get your voices heard. So
yeah, even if it's a story. I mean, every family has some story there.
Yeah, no, even if it's just something to share with your
disappeared in the war, or love letters that were found in the attic, or
exactly.
There's a million stories. You'd never know, you see some like old guy stumbling down the street, or some strange person in a cafe. You never know.
Here we go with you thinking about your characters, right? Like what's that first story?
That's right.
Stories come from anywhere, so don't close your doors on it. Try your best and get those thoughts out there, because I mean, you've inspired me today, Ralph. I'm sure our listeners are inspired too. So everyone listening, check out Ralph's website, check out the book on December 10th, and also visit authorsonmission.com. If you have your own ideas, we can share that story with the world. With that, I'm Danielle Hutchinson. Thank you so much for listening. And, I'm here with Ralph. Check out our other videos and podcasts. And until next time, keep writing, keep exploring, keep pushing boundaries. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle.